My identical twin sister stole $100,000 and destroyed my life for 2 years. Dad kicked me out thinking I was irresponsible. But when I got the security footage and confronted her in front of the entire family, she never expected I'd have the evidence that would completely expose her. I'm 26 years old. I work at a clothing store in the city. And honestly, I still can't believe all this happened. I mean, when I say my life got destroyed overnight, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. Like 2 years ago, my name was completely ruined. I lost my family, I lost my house, I lost everything basically, and all because of someone I trusted completely. I guess I should start from the beginning, when we were kids and everything was normal, or what I thought was normal. I grew up with my twin sister Caroline in a small town. You know, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and your reputation is everything. We're identical. Like completely identical. People always confused us when we were kids, and honestly, it was something we found amusing. Our father Richard raised us alone after Mom died when we were like 8 years old, and he did his best, I guess. He worked a lot, but was always there when we needed him. Caroline and I were inseparable as kids. We shared everything: clothes, friends, secrets. It was like having a best friend who understood everything about you without having to explain anything. But looking back now, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there. When we got to our teenage years, things started to change a bit. Caroline always wanted more. You know what I mean? More clothes, more outings, more attention, more of everything. I was quieter. I was content with what we had. But she was always looking for something bigger, something better. Dad didn't have much money. He worked in construction and did what he could to support us. But it was never enough for Caroline. I remember she started lying about small things, like saying she had permission to go out when she didn't, or using my clothes without asking and then denying she had taken them. Sister stuff, I thought at the time, nothing serious. After high school, I decided to stay in town and work at the local store while I saved up to maybe go to college later. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life, to be honest. Caroline, on the other hand, left for the city, got a job at some office, I don't know what, and started this life that looked like it was out of a magazine. Every time she came to visit us, she brought new clothes, expensive shoes, designer bags, and I thought, wow, she must be doing really well at that job. Dad was super proud of her. He always talked about how Caroline had gotten ahead and was doing something with her life. I didn't feel jealous or anything. I was genuinely happy for her, but there was something about the way she showed off everything that made me feel uncomfortable sometimes. The thing is, Caroline never talked much about the details of her job. Like when I'd ask what exactly she did or how much she made or how she could afford all those things, she'd change the subject or say something vague like she had really good benefits or that she knew how to invest her money. I let it go because, I don't know, I guess I didn't want to be nosy, or maybe part of me didn't want to know the truth. The times I went to visit her at her apartment in the city, I was impressed. She lived in a super luxurious building with a doorman and everything. She had furniture that looked really expensive, and we'd always go out to restaurants where one meal cost what I made in 2 days. She'd tell me to relax and enjoy. That she was treating, and I felt kind of guilty, but also grateful to have such a generous sister. Everything fell apart on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it perfectly because it was my day off, and I was at Dad's house helping him fix the yard. The mailman came and left a big envelope that came from the court, and Dad opened it thinking it was maybe some traffic notification or something. I saw him turn pale while he read, like literally the color drained from his face, and then he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. He asked me if I knew anything about some loans that, supposedly, I had taken out, and I had no idea what he was talking about. He handed me the papers and there was my name, Lily Parker, with a list of like 5 different loans from different banks and credit unions, all in default, all with large amounts of money I had never requested. The total amount was almost $100,000. Can you believe it? I made like $1,200 a month at the store. There was no way I could have taken out those loans even if I wanted to. I told Dad it had to be a mistake, that I had never gone to those banks, that I didn't even know where some of them were located. But he kept looking at the papers and then looking at me, and I could see he didn't believe me. He told me the documents had my signature, my ID, all my personal information, and that courts don't send these things by mistake. I tried to explain to him that someone must have stolen my identity, that this didn't make sense, but he was so angry he didn't want to listen to me. Things escalated super fast after that. In the following days, More letters started arriving, some from collectors, others from lawyers, all saying I owed money and that they were going to take legal action if I didn't pay immediately. Dad confronted me again, this time yelling, saying how could I have been so irresponsible, that I had embarrassed him, that he had raised me better than that. I was crying and trying to tell him it wasn't me. But he didn't believe me. He just didn't believe me. The worst part was when he told me that if I wasn't going to take responsibility for my actions, then I couldn't keep living in his house. That he wasn't going to be complicit in my irresponsibility. He gave me 2 days to leave. I called Caroline in a panic, thinking maybe she could help me understand what was happening or at least convince Dad to believe me. She acted all surprised and concerned, asked me if I was sure I hadn't taken out the loans and maybe forgot. As if that were possible. I told her it was impossible. That obviously I would know if I had taken out $100,000 in loans. She said it seemed very strange to her, but that surely there was an explanation, and that maybe I should hire a lawyer to sort out the whole matter. She was super kind and understanding on the phone, and I felt a bit better thinking that at least my sister supported me, even if Dad didn't. Those 2 days were the worst of my life up to that point. I packed bags with everything I could carry, basically clothes and some personal items, and looked for somewhere I could stay. I didn't have much money saved because I lived with Dad and barely spent on basics. Maybe I had like $2,000 saved up. A friend let me stay on her couch for a few days while I looked for something more permanent, and I spent nights without sleeping trying to understand how this had happened. I checked my bank accounts, my credit cards. Everything was normal. There were no strange movements or anything that indicated someone had accessed my information. It was like someone had created a parallel version of me just to ruin my life. I decided to move to the city because in town everyone had already heard about the loans. You know how it is in small towns, gossip flies. People looked at me weird at the store, and some customers even stopped coming when I was working. My boss was understanding, but eventually told me it might be better if I looked for work somewhere else because my situation was affecting the business. So I packed my things again and went to the city, hoping to start over, and maybe from there be able to investigate better what had happened with my identity. I got a job at a clothing store downtown. Nothing glamorous, but they paid well and let me work full-time. The apartment I could afford was basically a room with a shared bathroom in a kind of old building, but it was mine and nobody was going to kick me out as long as I paid rent. The first months were super hard. I worked all day and then spent nights trying to contact the banks and loan companies to explain to them that I hadn't taken out that money. Nobody believed me. Everyone said they had my signed documents, that there were cameras showing someone who looked like me in their offices, that there was no way it was fraud. I felt so powerless, so invisible, like I was screaming in an empty room and nobody could hear me. At the store, I met Sarah, a girl with super bright red hair who worked the afternoon shift with me. We became friends because she was also new to the city and we were both kind of lost trying to adapt. One day I told her my situation because I needed to talk to someone before going crazy, and she was quiet for a moment thinking. Then she asked me if I had any brothers or sisters, and when I told her I had an identical twin, like exactly identical, her eyes opened huge. She told me that maybe it wasn't a stranger who had stolen my identity, that maybe it was someone who literally had my face. At first, I didn't even want to consider the possibility. I mean, Caroline was my sister, my twin. We had shared everything since the day we were born. But Sarah insisted it made sense, that it explained why the bank cameras showed someone who looked like me, why nobody suspected fraud, why everything seemed so legitimate. She asked me about Caroline's lifestyle, how she could afford all those things with a normal office job. And that's when the pieces started to fit together in my head in a way that made me feel physically sick. The luxurious apartment, the designer clothes, the expensive restaurants, the trips she took every 2 months, none of that added up with a normal salary. We decided to investigate a bit, like do our own detective work because the police hadn't helped me when I tried to report the identity theft. One Saturday, Sarah and I went to one of the banks that appeared in the court documents, one that was on the north side of the city. We walked in and I told the teller I needed information about a loan I had supposedly taken out there. The woman looked at me and said, "Oh yes, I remember you. You came like a year and a half ago." I told her I had never been to that bank in my life, but she insisted she remembered me perfectly. That we had even talked about a trip you were going to take to Europe. My heart was beating super fast because I knew Caroline had gone to Europe around that time. We asked to speak with a supervisor, and when he arrived, he also said he remembered me. Sarah asked them if they could show the security footage from when supposedly I had been there, and after a lot of insisting and explaining the situation, they agreed to let us see some clips. And there it was, on the screen. Someone who was identical to me sitting at a loan officer's desk, signing papers, smiling. She was wearing clothes I had never seen. She carried herself with a confidence I didn't have, but physically it was impossible to tell us apart. I asked the supervisor to review the ID that person had presented, and when he brought the copy, it was my driver's license. Or at least it looked like it, with my photo but with a slightly different signature. We went to 2 other banks that same day, and the story repeated itself. Everywhere people recognized me, said I had been there, that I had been very kind and professional when applying for the loans. At one of the places they even told me I had mentioned the money was to start a business. Something about a clothing boutique. Sarah was taking notes of everything, while I tried to process what I was discovering. My sister, my own twin sister, had been using my identity to take out massive loans she never intended to pay, financing her luxury lifestyle while I worked for minimum wage and lived with my father. During the following weeks, we gathered all the evidence we could. We got copies of the loan applications where you could see the subtle differences in the signature, although they were similar enough to pass as genuine. Sarah helped me make a timeline comparing the dates when the loans were requested, with dates when I could prove I was in town working, using pay stubs, and even photos with timestamps and location. We also started following Caroline's lifestyle on social media, where she posted photos of everything: her expensive purchases, her trips, her outings to fancy restaurants, all perfectly documented with dates that matched the loan disbursements. The amount of rage I felt was something I had never experienced before. It wasn't just that she had stolen money from me or ruined my credit. It was that she had destroyed my relationship with my father, taken away my home, my reputation, my peace of mind, everything. And she had done it knowing exactly the consequences I was going to suffer, probably even planned it that way so I would take the blame while she continued living her perfect life. I wondered if she had ever felt remorse. If at any point when she called me pretending to be concerned, she had thought about confessing everything, but each new piece of evidence we found convinced me that she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care in the slightest. I decided to consult with a lawyer because I needed to understand my legal options and how I could clear my name officially. I searched online and found Nicholas Hunt, a guy like 50 years old who specialized in fraud and identity cases. I told him the whole story and showed him the evidence we had gathered, and he was quiet for a good while looking at the documents. Finally, he told me that technically I had a solid case of identity theft and fraud, that with the evidence from the cameras and the discrepancies in the signatures, I could prove it wasn't me who took out those loans. But he also warned me that prosecuting my own sister was going to be complicated and probably very painful for the whole family. He asked if I was prepared for that. I told him I had no other choice, that my life was already destroyed and all I wanted was to clear my name and maybe recover some of what I had lost. Nicholas explained that first we needed to confront Caroline with the evidence, give her the chance to accept responsibility and maybe reach an agreement without having to go to court. He told me if she refused or tried to deny everything, then we would have to file formal criminal charges and let the justice system do its job. He also mentioned I needed to officially report all this to each of the banks and credit agencies to start the process of cleaning my record, but that was going to take time, probably years. Like 3 months passed from when we started the investigation, until I finally had enough evidence and a plan for how to confront Caroline. During that time, I didn't talk to her at all. I ignored her calls and messages, and she eventually stopped trying to contact me. I also didn't talk to Dad because I knew he still didn't believe me, and I didn't want to give him half information. I needed to have everything perfectly documented before approaching him again. Sarah was incredible during all this time. She spent her days off helping me review documents and organizing all the information, and even let me stay at her apartment some nights when everything felt too overwhelming. The plan was to confront Caroline at the annual family reunion that Dad always organized at his house, usually at the end of summer. It was the only time all the extended family got together. Uncles, cousins, grandparents, everyone. I knew Caroline was going to be there because she never missed those reunions. She loved showing off her successful life in front of everyone. My strategy was to present the evidence in front of the whole family so she couldn't escape or manipulate the situation in her favor, and also because I needed Dad to be there and see the truth with his own eyes. Nicholas told me it was risky to do it that way instead of a private confrontation, but I needed everyone to know what she had done. And the day of the reunion, I arrived with Sarah because I needed moral support and also a witness to everything that was going to happen. Dad was surprised to see me, obviously, because I hadn't talked to him in months and honestly didn't know if he was going to let me into the house. But there were more people around, and I guess he didn't want to make a scene, so he just nodded and let me pass. Caroline was in the yard talking with some cousins, wearing a dress that probably cost what I made in 3 months. And when she saw me, her face changed for a second, like fear or panic, but then she smiled and acted normal. She came to greet me as if everything was fine, asked me how I was and where I had been, and I just told her we needed to talk, that I had something important to discuss with the whole family. I waited until everyone was gathered eating, and then I asked for everyone's attention. I could feel my hands shaking, while I held the folder with all the documents, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. I told the family I needed to share something that had been happening for the last 2 years, something that had destroyed my life and my relationship with Dad. Caroline was sitting on the other side of the yard, and I could see her getting tense, her eyes moving like looking for an exit. I started explaining about the fraudulent loans. How Dad had kicked me out of the house thinking I was irresponsible. How I had had to move to the city and start from scratch while my credit was completely ruined. Then I took out the photos from the bank security cameras and passed them around for everyone to see. I explained how the person in those photos wasn't me but someone using my identity, someone who had access to all my personal information and looked exactly like me. Dad was looking at the photos with a frown, trying to understand what he was seeing, and then Sarah, bless her, said out loud what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to say, that the only person who could have impersonated me so perfectly was my identical twin. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Caroline stood up super fast, like almost knocking over her chair, and started saying this was ridiculous. How dare I accuse her of something like this in front of the whole family? That obviously I was desperate to blame someone else for my own irresponsibility. But I was prepared for that. I took out the timelines that Sarah and I had made, showing how each loan coincided with some big purchase or trip that Caroline had posted on social media. I showed the receipts from my work that proved I was in town on the exact dates when the loans were requested in the city. I showed the signature comparisons where the subtle differences were obvious once you knew what to look for. The family was in total shock, some looking at the documents, others looking at Caroline, others looking at Dad, waiting for him to say something. Caroline started walking toward the door, saying she didn't have to stay there and listen to these ridiculous accusations. But Dad stood up and told her to stop. His voice sounded strange, like broken and furious at the same time. He asked her directly if it was true, if she had done what I was saying, and Caroline just stood there without saying anything, which was practically a confession in itself. Dad asked her again, louder this time, and she mumbled something about how everything was more complicated than it seemed. I ran after her when she tried to leave. I caught up with her in the parking lot and blocked her path to her car. I told her I wasn't going to let her escape like that she owed me at least an explanation after everything she had done to me. Sarah and Dad arrived behind me, and some other relatives had stayed at the entrance of the house watching. Caroline started crying, but I don't know if they were real tears or just part of her manipulation. She said she was sorry, that things had gotten out of control, that she had only started with a small loan because she urgently needed money and thought she could pay it back quickly, but then she needed another one to pay the first one, and so it became a snowball she couldn't control. I asked her how she could have done this to me, how she could have watched me suffer knowing she was responsible, and she just kept saying she was sorry, that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. Dad asked her how much money she had taken out in total using my name, and when she said probably close to $100,000 between all the loans, he had to sit down on the step because it looked like he was going to faint. He told her he couldn't believe a daughter of his had done something like this. How could she have destroyed her own sister's life for money? Caroline tried to touch his arm, but he pulled away, and that reaction hurt her more than anything else. You could see it on her face. Nicholas had advised me about what to say at this moment if Caroline admitted her guilt. I told her she had 2 options. She could accept full responsibility, pay all the loans, officially clear my name, and maybe we could resolve this without criminal charges, or she could keep denying it and I would present all the evidence in court and let the legal system take care of her. I explained that with the evidence we had, it was basically impossible for her to win, that she would end up with a criminal record for fraud and identity theft, and she'd probably go to prison. Dad added that if she didn't do the right thing right now, he would personally make sure she faced all possible legal consequences. Caroline eventually agreed. although I'm not sure if it was from genuine remorse or just because she realized she had no other way out. In the following weeks, she worked with Nicholas to sign all the necessary documents, admitting she had fraudulently taken out the loans using my identity. She committed to paying each of the loans using her own resources. She had to sell her luxurious apartment, her car, basically everything she had bought with the stolen money. She also had to work with each bank and credit agency to clean my record and ensure my name was completely cleared. The process took almost a full year. It was exhausting and stressful, but eventually my credit was restored and public records clearly showed I had been a victim of fraud. Dad apologized to me like 1,000 times, crying, saying he should have believed me from the beginning, that he should never have kicked me out of the house without even hearing my full version of the story. I told him I understood, that Caroline had been very convincing, and the situation had seemed very real from his perspective. Our relationship took time to heal. It's still healing, to be honest, but at least now we can talk, and he knows I was never the irresponsible person he thought I was. We started having dinners together occasionally, and although there are still awkward moments, it's getting better little by little. Caroline fulfilled her part of the agreement. She paid all the loans, even though it took selling basically everything she had and getting a second job. We haven't spoken since the confrontation at the family reunion, like literally zero contact. Part of me hates what she did to me, but another part, a small part, just feels some pity because she destroyed her own life too in the process. She lost the family's trust, her lifestyle, her reputation, everything. I don't know if we'll ever be able to have any kind of relationship again. Honestly, I'm not sure I want to try. Sarah is still my best friend, the only person besides Nicholas who was there when I needed it most. I still work at the clothing store, but now I have a better apartment and I've been able to save some money again. My credit is clean, and I was even able to get a credit card last month, something that sounds so simple but for me was a huge victory. Last week, Dad called me just to see how I was doing, for no special reason, and that made me feel good. Things aren't perfect. Not even close. But at least now I have my life back. My name is clear, and the truth finally came out.